BMX media, right? Because this was, again, it started in 2006 when I got the job. And this is the early days of BMX on the internet.
The Broken Spoke Podcast, Episode 1. Adam Taylor, aka Fat Tony. This episode has been sponsored by ZZ Designs. More information in the description or at the end of the video.
After college, you started working at Ride BMX.
Yep. Yeah, literally got my dream job for the magazine. So I was the online, my official title was online associate editor at, Ride BMX Magazine. So essentially I did all the web content. So interviews, articles, photos, videos, event coverage for the website, which used to be called BMX Online. And then eventually they finally bought the domain ridebmx.com.
Actually, I have a quote from 2006 when you first started working on Ride BMX. It was
nice. Let's hear it. Did some research.
Yeah. So this goes into like 9 to 5. So you said, I've been pretty busy with work-related stuff. Working 9 to 5 is weird, but I ride every chance that I get. Well, there's more to that, but like also it says you're having sessions with Jeff. So like, how did you first feel on your 9 to 5, and how was that like first real work experience?
Oh, that's interesting. It's been a while since I thought about this. It's like, 20 years ago almost, it feels like. So Jeff Z was awesome. I met him probably 2 years or so before I started working there. And I kind of kept in touch with him through emails, and he gave me a lot of pointers and tips on shooting and just kind of the industry as a whole, like kind of how to navigate, like getting my way into there. And then once I got the job there, he was amazing to work with. But I remember like showing up to the job and, my nickname was Fat Tony. Very few people kind of really knew that my name was Adam Taylor. And I walked in the office my first official day of work, and there was like a big sign up on the wall above my cubicle that said like, "Welcome, Adam Taylor." And it was almost kind of like, poking at me or like, taking shots at me because they knew I liked to be called fat at the time. And they were like, putting my name real big on the wall, Adam Taylor. So that was kind of funny. But then I also remember thinking like, man, like they just kind of like threw me in here. Like, I don't really know what I'm doing, like I'm going to start writing stuff. I'm going to start doing some interviews, but like they didn't give me a ton of direction. So it was Keith Mulligan was the editor of the magazine at the time. Ryan Fudger and Jeff Zielinski were the two associate editors. And there was a graphic designer as well that, laid out the magazine, but he wasn't really like involved in the day-to-day stuff, like as a group with us. And he wasn't a writer. And then there was, a copy editor and a photo editor that worked on our magazine, but also like Trans World Motocross and Trans World Quad, which was like the four-wheeler magazine. And, they did some other stuff. So they were in the office and, there's an ad sales guy, but really it was just like the four of us that like worked on the BMX stuff. And they were busy with the magazine. And I was like kind of over here in the cubicle all by myself, like just doing all the website stuff. And so in the beginning, it was like kind of a shock that I had so much responsibility, but also like so much freedom and so little guidance on like kind of where to take everything.
Yeah. I kind of have that. Well, when I first started, I had the same experience now where it was like, we had a few meetings and it's like, I'm expected to go out and learn and stuff. And at the beginning, there was a lot of like pressure of like responsibility. When you first started, was it like a lot of pressure, like hard work, or was it like still kind of like fun?
I never felt pressure in terms of like, I think most of the pressure would have come from myself because I knew that A, I wanted to do a good job. B, I wanted to meet the expectations of, the people that put their trust in me, meaning like, Jeff and Ryan and Keith. But also knowing that like, I truly felt like I was helping build up BMX media, right? Because this was, again, it started in 2006 when I got the job. And this is the early days of BMX on the internet, right? And so before that, it was all magazines, and now it's all internet or all Instagram, even whatever. And so I was in this weird little sweet spot of time where, like, when I got the job there was videos online, but it was like tiny little MOV files embedded in the page, hosted on our server, not YouTube links or YouTube embeds. You know what I mean? Like Vimeo wasn't around yet. And so I truly felt like I was helping kind of pioneer like creating BMX media on the internet. And so I think pressure came from myself from that. Then the other pressure that I will say, here's a funny story. essentially I had to make at least one like unique post every single day. And so it was a constant grind, right? So like when I first started, we came up with kind of a content calendar where it's like every Monday is, I can't remember what it was. Let's call it a bike check. Every Tuesday is a how-to. Every Wednesday is a video. Every Thursday is a interview, right? So like every single day of the week, there was like a set feature that was supposed to go up. And it's like, if I don't have 5 bike checks done laid out for the whole month, well, now I have to go out and find pros to meet up with and like photograph their bikes and like, did the little interview and everything, right? And so it was just constant. And of course, on top of the features, there was, press releases being sent in. And eventually it got to the point where people were uploading, YouTube content, and I had to filter out through all that and curate videos from YouTube and everything. And so there was a pressure of just like keeping up with the cycle because I really did it all on my own. And it was just nonstop and having to come up with those things all the time. And so the funny side story of that is, here I am, I quit that job in December 2011. So we're 15 years removed. And the only reoccurring, what I'll call a nightmare, quote unquote, that I've ever had is from that job. If I feel stress in my life, I'll have like a reoccurring kind of nightmare type stressful dream where I realize that I haven't posted anything on the Ride BMX website in a long time. And oh my God, I have to go out and create something and post something. It's literally like a stressful dream that wakes me up in the middle of the night of like, I haven't posted in a while and I have to get this done. And that's 15 years later.
It might be like that for me because sometimes I have like really bad dreams just about work. And yeah, but I have a question. So when you were at LSU, you made BMX friends. So like your first interaction with like pros was in LSU with like Terry Adams, and then you had that those ramps, or did you started making connections there, and then
yeah. So the ramps you're talking about, my first year of school, there was another rider that went to the school. He was also in graphic design. He had a house that was like real close to my dorm, like right on the edge of campus. And he decided to build a spine mini ramp in his backyard. And so he basically funded it, and a handful of us around town pitched in a few bucks here and there when we could. But he funded this ramp, and I was one of the ones that would go over and help build it with them. I didn't know what I was doing, but he would just give me guidance, like, "Hey, screw this here, like hold this, whatever, cut this." And so I helped build this ramp, and now we had a ramp that was kind of like the little center point of our local scene, right? And it didn't take too long for the local Red Bull representatives to kind of catch on that we had this ramp. So they helped essentially kind of sponsor like a little backyard jam. And that little backyard jam, I think we did it for like 5 years straight, maybe 4 years. But by the end, like the third or fourth year, it had gotten big enough to where we were able to like call up Jeff Z and say, "Hey, Red Bull will pay for you to come down here and like take photos at our event," And now once we had like a professional from a magazine coming to cover the event, gave us a little more credibility. So, guys like Terry Adams, who again is Red Bull athlete, like Red Bull had him come out and do like a demo in the street. And then other people from, neighboring states and stuff would come out as well. So like, I think the last year we did it, like James Foster, like drove out with Walter Perringer all the way from California. Joe Rich drove out from Austin, like there was a handful of pros that like came to check out this ramp jam because it kind of like caught fire and people heard about how cool it was and stuff. And so it was kind of during that time when I started, meeting some pros. And around the same time as well, like kind of while we were doing the ramp jam and stuff too, really good friend of mine, Brock Gomez, who was, in our local scene, we were kind of just like road trip buddies. Like every chance we got, we just like hopped in one of our cars and like took a road trip to wherever we could get to and, wherever we had money to go to. And so traveling as much as we could, like again, from Louisiana, branching out to anywhere within probably a 10-hour drive, in any direction. We would kind of meet pros along the way a little bit as well. So that was kind of like the intro to the pros. And then the way that the relationship with Terry got built up is that right after I graduated, there was like a 6-month gap where like I had graduated and the guys at Ride told me that I had the job, but they also had like put on what they called a hiring freeze because the president of the company had like left to go start vitalbmx.com. And so essentially it's like I didn't have school and I didn't have a job, but I knew eventually I had a job waiting for me, like once the hiring freeze got let go. So I had this interesting like 6 or so month gap of no school and no work, but also no pressure that like I had to go out and like find work. And it was during that gap where I hit up Terry Adams and was like, hey, I'm out of school. I'm trying to shoot photos. I'm submitting to, Dig and Ride UK and whatever, trying to, get my photos out there. Do you want to meet up and try to shoot photos for an interview? And he's like, yeah, dude, this is what I do. Like, this is my full-time job, is to just ride and shoot photos and get content and get my name out there. So we ended up hanging out, I think, for like 10 days straight almost, and just shot photos like for, all day as much as we could, and put together a pretty cool collection of photos that Ride UK ended up picking up to do an interview. And so that was like, I had met him at the ramp jams where Red Bull sent them out to like do the demos or whatever. I didn't really become friends with him until I kind of like cold called him and said, hey, do you want to just meet up and shoot photos for this interview? And then, after that, we became pretty close.
Because you guys both had the mutual interest. Well, going back to the ramps, you're saying you had an episode of props with those ramps. Is that right? I think I watched it. That was pretty
cool. Yeah. I think that was probably the final year. And what's funny is we had started planning for that final jam before I graduated from college. And then I basically got the job offer from Ride, and I was like telling my friends, like, hey, you guys might have to like put this jam on without me. Like, I might be gone and moved by the time it comes around. But then, like I said, there was that hiring freeze. And so like, the date of me moving and starting working kind of got pushed back. And so I was able to kind of see out that last ramp jam. The title of it was Transitions, was like the name of the jam. And again, like by that time we had kind of the money to like say, hey, I think it was Walter Perringer that came out to film that. And so we were able to hit him up and say, hey, you work for props or whatever, like Red Bull's willing to pay for you to come out to like cover this, to be able to put the footage in, the props magazine or whatever.
At that time, were you like super excited that, all these people were coming out to this jam? How did you feel? Was it like?
Yeah, it was definitely exciting. And by the last jam, I think the last two jams, not only was it the backyard original ramp, but some BMX riders had moved in next door and built another ramp in that backyard. And so it was two backyards side by side that both had ramps in them. And to have people come from all over the country was really kind of mind blowing. Like it showed that in our small area, like we could have a cool scene that people came to, because for us, it was always like, we got to go to Austin, we got to go to SoCal. Like we see the scene in the videos from New Jersey or New York, like all these places that are quote unquote bigger than us. So to have people come to us, really kind of special. And then of course, seeing the pros ride our ramps and like freaking destroy them, like way more than, certainly more than I could. And even like the best guys in our area, like, just to see people tearing up the ramps is really awesome. But in terms of the career move, for me, like I was always very, very goal and career oriented as well. And so throughout this whole time, I also knew that I was still working towards a career in the BMX industry. And so almost more exciting than just seeing the pros and the riders was getting those industry connections, like Joe Rich shows up and I'm able to like hand him one of our t-shirts and, tell him hi and chit chat for a minute. And like, okay, cool. Now the owner of Terrible One knows who I am. Like, this is freaking awesome. Jeff Z is there and like, I get to hang out with him and see him shooting photos, and Walter Perringer's there and he knows who I am. So I'm, making these industry connections at the time before I even was officially working in the industry.
Yeah, I think I read that you always knew that you wanted to work for like the magazine and make connections. So once you left Ride BMX, I assume you had all these connections, so you started doing your own stuff. Um, I once you, how did the decision come out of you leaving Ride BMX to go do more freelance stuff?
How long? Yeah, how long do we want to make this story? Yeah, so to the first part, yeah, by the time I left Ride, like I kind of knew, everybody in the industry. And when I left, I didn't have anything concrete lined up in terms of like another job, another role, like, any paid gigs lined up. I just, left. And then, I mean, within a couple of weeks, like I had people saying like, hey, we'll fly you here to make this video, or can you, produce these videos for our YouTube channel, or come shoot for this event or whatever. So things started flowing in pretty quickly after people found out that I was kind of a free agent, so to speak. But when I left the magazine, it was kind of like weighing the pros and cons, which to be frank, like I had done that probably since the first year I started working there, because I knew like even early on that like as much as I loved it and it was a dream job and there were so many awesome things about it, there was even in the beginning some things that I didn't love about it. And to be frank, off the top of my head, I can't necessarily remember any of them, but I do remember kind of weighing the pros and cons like really early on. Like, this is where I want to be. This is where I'm at. Is this helping me to get to where I want to be, or is it holding me back from that? And do I love it enough to keep it, kind of thing? And so I kind of weighed those. And then eventually, like I said, around 5.5 years, that's when the scale tipped in the opposite direction. And I'll try to keep it short, but there was a catalyst for that, which was twofold. So one is that there was a TV network called Fuel TV back in the day during that time. That was like an action sports network. And they were launching a new TV show where it was basically like a weekly news update on all things action sports. And they would have a panelist from each sport to kind of talk about the news from that week. And I had known the producer previously, and he reached out to me to say, "Hey, do you want to be our BMX panelist to talk about the news each week?" So I was super excited about that potential opportunity. So that was kind of like looming over here, and like literally the same week, my boss had a talk with me where he basically put me on like a probation, because he said, "Hey, there's things that are going on that we don't like. And it's not necessarily your work. It's more basically your personality and like the way you're presenting yourself, which reflects on our company and stuff." And at that point, it was kind of like, oh, wow. Okay. So what it boils down to is that like you guys don't like my personality, which means I'm not a good fit for the company. Right. And again, I'm trying to make this very short and not trying to get into things. And I don't want to throw anybody under the bus. But those two things kind of happened at the same time. And it was like, I kind of had to take a step back and be like, man, okay, there are certain things that they pointed out in this, review where I got put on probation that, okay, I see their point of view and I can change that. And I'm willing to like work on that part of me. But then there's other things that's like, hey, this is just who I am. And I'm proud of this part of me. And this is my personality. And if that doesn't fit with you and isn't representing the company the way you want it to, well, then maybe this isn't a good fit anymore. And so that kind of happened both at the same time. And that's, like I said, when the scales outweighed each other. And I was like, okay, well, if I leave now, hopefully I can still get this TV job, which did not pay very much at all, but it was something, right? And it would have kept me, on TV. It might have led to other things, whatever. Long story short, I ended up leaving and then still did not get the TV job because they had already had to move on to somebody else. Because essentially what happened is that I got put on this probation thing. And then like 2 days later, I'm like, hey, boss, can I leave early on Mondays to go film this TV show? And he's like, absolutely not, dude. Like, we just put you on probation. Like, are you crazy? Like, and we don't want your face and name on TV representing our company when we just told you we don't like you, like that's kind of how it played out. I was like, all right, I guess it's time to go.
Yes. When you left that job, you in your first year, I read that you doubled your money and then you also traveled a lot. Is that?
Yeah. Yeah. I think one of my goals, again, I was like I've always been very goal oriented, and I'm again, this is a long time ago. Memory's a little foggy, but I seem to remember like writing down like a goal number of like how much I wanted to work throughout the year. And it was pretty low. You know what I mean? It was like maybe 120 days, like one third of the year, let's say, as opposed to like almost every fucking day, like I was when I worked in the magazine. And so I intentionally like set out to like not work nearly as much and like just enjoy life more. And I think it was right around there. Like, I worked 120 days and I had doubled my salary, meaning my salary at the magazine was not very much. I think when I left the magazine after being there for like 5.5 years, I want to say it was like somewhere around like $44,000 or something, like pretty freaking low for, a full-time job at like the biggest BMX media companies to ever exist. But yeah, like that following year, like I more than doubled that salary. Now, I will say this, as we're talking about money, when I worked at the magazine, that was my salary. But you have to keep in mind that I was also able to make other money on the side, kind of like licensing my photos to DC or Red Bull or Monster and those kind of things, which I was very proactive in and was able to, make money that way. And when I worked at the magazine, I was able to get a lot of free stuff. So my salary was low, but I got a lot of free clothes and bikes and parts and gear and, all that kind of stuff. But yeah, the first year after I left the magazine, definitely made more money than the magazine paid me. I was traveling a ton, and I was able to. This is at a time in my life where that's what I wanted to do, was travel and do this kind of work. I just freaking loved it. It didn't feel like work to me when I wasn't at the magazine office. So I could do something like go to Australia for 5 weeks and just like stay with riders and film and shoot with them. And then straight from there, go to New Zealand for a week because there was a competition there, create content there, and straight from there, go to Canada for a week. There was another event there, and while I'm there, cover the event and then go out and shoot photos with Mike Gray or whatever, and kind of combine all these trips. And so it helped me leverage financially how I was getting around, because I'm not like going back and forth to home. It was like I'm just going from one event to the other.
No, in that time, because you did a lot of work. You were a team manager at Freaking Underwear. You worked for Alley Sports. I think you announced a Dude Tour. You had your podcast, the Expansive Podcast. Was it just at this point like, I want to make money, but I also want to travel and do the fun stuff that I want to do and take the jobs I want to do? Or was it more like, I have to get these jobs, so I'll take anything I get? Or was it just like you choosing anything that fits your wants?
Yeah, good question. So I never made any money on the podcast, which I think I only did like 35 or 40 episodes of that. And that was honestly like early-ish days of podcasts. And I remember hearing Tim Ferriss on his like very first podcast that he kind of said like, oh, I'm just trying this out. I really just want to have like interesting conversations with people. And that's kind of the approach that I took. It was like, how can I have a cool conversation with guys like Dave Mira, where it's like, I know him, but not good enough to say, hey, Dave, can I call you and talk to you for an hour and like ask you about your investments and like, all these business ideas and stuff, right? But if I'm having a podcast and I'm interviewing him and recording it and sharing it with the world, well, now I have every reason to call him for an hour and talk about those things. So I never made any money with that. I did announce some events and some demos and contests and stuff, but not for Dude Tour. But really, like, I guess my mindset was none of it made very much money at all. So I kind of had to do as much of it as possible. But at the same time, I truly did love all of it. I loved hanging out with bike riders. I loved shooting photos and videos. I loved being at the contests and events. And so it was kind of like, what can I do around all of this stuff to make money and make ends meet? And again, like I never had made much in the other role at Ride. So of course it was like, okay, how can I maximize the payroll this month or this year or whatever? But even then, like really I don't know if there was truly a ceiling on it, but it certainly felt like there was a pretty low ceiling on where you could go in that industry and career, because I knew pretty much all the people in BMX media. And even though they didn't talk about the money very much, like I had a pretty general idea of like, what the top end they might be making. And so some of them that, like, let's say Mark Losey, who was the team manager for Nike, like, again, I never know how much he made, but I would imagine he was making, more than like, I was, except stuff, right? But even saying that, it didn't seem like there was much room to grow, right? Like I was producing videos for Ally Sports. I was shooting photos for DC and Red Bull and Monster and different companies. And I was announcing contests and stuff, but I was still making not very much money, right? Like right at or just under 100 grand a year. And I was like hustling hard, you know what I mean? Like people knew me as like a hustling guy that was like really trying to get stuff done and make money, right? And I still never made that much. And so looking up, I could see the ceiling was like right on top of me. And it's like, fuck, like there's nowhere else to go. You know what I mean? Like what else can you do to make more money in this industry? And there wasn't much of it. And I think a lot of people in the industry kind of, this is where we start to get in the weeds with things. But I think in BMX in general, especially at that time, if you were trying to make money, it's kind of looked down upon almost. Like, why do you want to profit from this passion that we all love so much? And I did love it. I absolutely loved it for a long time, which is why I did it for so long. Like going from being a little rider watching the movie Rad all the way up to, my stint in the industry. But at a certain point, it was like, man, like there's really not much else here financially, and eventually I do want to be able to make more money than that, which wasn't necessarily the reason why I kind of like started working my way out of the industry. But I'm sure it played a little bit of a part as well.
When people say looking down on you for making money, I think when I grew up, it was the same thing with social media. These writers were making money, and it wasn't true like to the normal route of just going to contests, getting good and making connections. It was more like you can do this own thing yourself. And I think, you know, maybe it's the same because all of a sudden this guy or these people are making so much money doing this more than probably some of the pros. So, I think, it's hard for people to see that change.
ZZ Designs is one dude in his basement bringing back the 90s style design, heavily inspired by motocross and the early FMX scene, and he's just doing it for the love of the game. That's why I gotta support the homie on this one. Hit him up for any designs on Instagram at ZZ Designs.